What does counter refer to in Countersink? Non-English questioner, to countersink means to drill a sloped hole so that screw heads can sink into the material to be hidden. In German, for example, the term for this action is sinken, which would translate to only sink, not countersink, which would literally translate to German gegensenken, which doesn't make any sense in German. I know the following meanings of counter. A mechanism to increase numbers. Something like opposite or reverse, like in counterattack. The furniture in a shop or bar where the salesperson works. None of them makes sense for screws. What exactly does counter mean here?
The conjecture on this in the OED says, Etymology, counter, prefix, apparently in a sense akin to 8b, the whole being the counterpart of that which is to be sunk in it.
My grandfather was a blacksmith, now long dead. My understanding is that a countersink, also called a bob punch, is used to form a depression in the surface of plates to be joined together when riveting. Without this, the head of the rivet projects entirely and is subject to damage. If the head is broken off, the rivet will sink into the plate. The indentation counters any tendency to sink. I suspect the term also applies to indentations for horseshoe nails. Unfortunately, my grandfather and my father are deceased, and I can't find anything online to support what I'm saying. I'll leave this here for now, and see if I can find anything further.
Google's Ngram viewer returns results for countersink that indicate that it was a new word in the early 19th. It does not appear in the corpus at all before 1820 and did not take off until about 1860. This indicates that countersinking was a process associated with industrialization. The lexico entry for counter gives an uncommon definition which seems to be relevant. The back part of a shoe or boot, enclosing the heel, for which it gives the origin as mid-19th century abbreviation of counterfort buttress, from French contrefort. The mid-19th origin of the shoemaking term matches quite well with the appearance of countersink in the literature, and countersinking a hole so that the head of a screw or other fastener fits below the surface certainly improves the strength of the join and could be said to buttress the fastener. I suspect that countersink also derives, perhaps in part, from counterfort.
The etymology seems very murky, but my way to remember the meaning and difference between countersink and counterbore is thus: if you are building a countertop furniture, then you don't want screw/bolt heads protruding. So you bore a little extra for the screw/bolt head, hence counterbore. Then, if you slope the walls of your extra boring, it resembles a drain aka sink, hence countersink. I know that this doesn't line up with the past tense countersunk. But the noun, the sink in your kitchen, and the verb, to sink into quicksand, are obviously common in origin. From the other couple of languages I've studied, it seems that because English lacks a lot of explicit grammatical features of other Indo-European languages and instead relies more on context of usage, the process of nounifying verbs and verbifying nouns can have ambiguous results. All in all, I think it's simply too murky of a history to try to pluck a thread of causality from unless you're a scholar poring over primary documents, and whatever mnemonic you can come up with is good enough.